I've already made a video on this channel saying that I think the Boston Celtics are the best team in the league. I think they are the favorites to win the NBA title, and there are a ton of metrics that actually point to them as like a borderline historically great team. But given the way their roster is constructed, what happens if they fail? What if they don't make the finals? What if they don't win the title? Are there going to be some significant changes for the Celtics? Really quickly though, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, PrizePicks. PrizePicks is an awesome way to add a little bit extra fun to your NBA viewing experience and win some cash as well. And with the NBA playoffs coming up as well, now is a fantastic time to get started with PrizePicks with a 100% deposit match up to $100 when you use code SPORTING or you click the link in the description. That offer is down in the description, as I said. If you've never done PrizePicks before, essentially you go onto the site and you pick more or less for between 2 and 6 of these numbers. It is just you against the numbers, and you try and figure out what might happen in a particular game based off the matchup, based off how a player has been playing. And as I said, you pick more or less for each of these numbers, and if you get the selections correct, you win some cash. And how much you win depends on how many of the selections you picked. Your payout can also depend on these demon and goblin numbers as well. Some of these numbers are harder to get correct, while others are easier. And obviously the harder ones increase your payout and the easier ones decrease your payout, but are easier to get when you add them to your selection. So it's just that simple. It's you against the numbers on PrizePicks. Now is a fantastic time to get started. Again, I have that offer for you in the description. Use code SPORTING. Click the link in the description for a 100% deposit match up to $100. And thank you again to PrizePicks for sponsoring this video. Now, ordinarily, you would just assume that a roster this good would be able to handle one disappointing postseason run. And the roster is as good as it is, and guys are under contract. You just bring everyone back. But Boston's situation specifically makes this a little bit weird. First and foremost, this is very clearly a season in which they pushed a lot of their chips into the middle of the table, trying to win the title this year. They changed the roster around by trading away Marcus Smart. They brought in Drew Holiday. They brought in Kristaps Porzingis. They used some future assets. They're spending a ton of money. They're one of the most expensive rosters in the entire league this season. And clearly, this is a group that they feel like has a legit chance to win a title. And based off the regular season, they are absolutely right. But by no means does that guarantee them a championship. They've had issues with the Heat in the past. Denver, if they do make it to the finals and play them, is a really tough matchup for them. And if they were to lose, I think there's a couple of things that happen. One, I think it brings into question, or at least it will bring into question for a lot of people, the idea of Jason Tatum as like a number one on a championship team, because this is as good of a roster as you can expect to put around a star, a superstar, whatever you qualify Tatum as. And if Boston still can't get it done and is it once again in some people's minds disappointing in the postseason, it does bring into question the idea of, can you build a championship caliber team around someone like Jason Tatum, who's really good, but not necessarily on your, MVP level of guys like, Jokic and Giannis, guys that have won titles in recent years. The other question that's going to come in here as well is Joe Mazzulla as the head coach, despite the fact that he has, I believe in this moment in time, the best winning percentage ever of any coach that's coached like at least 100 games. Joe Mazzulla owns the best winning percentage. He's won the most games to start a career ever in NBA history through his first however many games he's coached. But if you continue to fall apart potentially in the postseason or don't look as strong as you should, I think there's going to be questions there as well. But the roster as well is extremely interesting to me. One, the pairing of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown together is incredibly intriguing because it's what kind of the foundation of this era of Celtics basketball has been built upon. But there's always been kind of rumors about the possibility of splitting them up. Even in the year that they made the finals when they had Ime Udoka as head coach, before they turned it around that season, there were some real rumors about splitting those two guys up. And also, Jaylen Brown now has this new massive contract extension as well. And at the time that he signed it, it was kind of made clear that didn't necessarily mean that he was going to finish that contract in Boston. I think there's certainly some smoke to the idea that he kind of wants to maybe have his own team and wants to see what it looks like when he is maybe the number one guy. And that pairing alongside Tatum, although it seems like they get along well and they play decently well together, I don't think that's an idea that necessarily is going to go away anytime soon. In addition to the fact that it is more difficult now than it ever has been to continually build expensive championship caliber teams in the NBA. And Jaylen Brown's contract is a massive part of that. Boston, for the foreseeable future, is going to be a luxury tax team. They're going to be well over the cap, and they're going to have a ton of money tied up into just a few players. And if they fail this season, or maybe in subsequent seasons, they might decide that it is better for their team to spread out some of the money that Jaylen Brown is making and maybe get some assets in exchange for him if they don't feel like that combination with him and Tatum is working super well together, which ties in as well to some of their upcoming free agency stuff. Drew Holiday is a 2024 free agent. Derek White is a 2025 free agent. And if you're going to, start talking about bringing all those guys back on some huge huge money deals. You're talking about the most expensive roster that the league has ever seen, and some of the restrictions that come along with that. There are rules in place that limit teams from continuing to build out their roster outside of their main guys. And even though Boston theoretically can continue to bring back some of these guys on some decent deals, Derek White and Drew Holiday, the guys I'm talking about specifically here, and for the next 2 to 3 years have a real championship run, one, it's going to be unbelievably expensive on the luxury tax, something that in the past, not necessarily recently, but in the past, Boston has at least kind of tried to avoid in certain years. And then also, it's so restrictive in terms of the ability to add players then along the margins, and their entire team is going to be based around their highest paid players. And really, the argument for all of this comes down to what happens for Boston in the postseason. There's an incredible amount of reliance on three-point shooting for them. That has been well documented and well talked about. And if that fails them, if that doesn't work out for them, I think there's going to be a lot of questions. And I honestly would not be surprised if there is the possibility of a Jaylen Brown trade in the offseason or at the trade deadline next year or the following offseason. I think that's a real possibility, which is crazy for a team that is as good as Boston is right now. And so really this question of like what happens if Boston fails comes down to two things for me. One, it comes down to the concept of Jason Tatum as a number one player on a championship team, because he's clearly an all-NBA caliber guy, clearly extremely good, but is he on the level of someone that you could put alongside, put up there with someone like Giannis, Jokic, guys that have won titles as the number one option? Is he up there? Is he at least close? Or is it possible to put a good enough team around him to make the difference maybe, pretty negligible? I would argue that the supporting cast around Jokic in Denver is worse than the supporting cast around Tatum in Boston. Is there enough of a difference there to make up the gap between Jokic and Tatum as individual players? That remains to be seen. And like I said, this is a fantastic test case for Tatum as a number one option on a championship team, because he is basically in his prime. This is as good of a team as you could possibly expect to put around him in terms of complementary options, in terms of the way everything fits. It's as good as it gets right now from a roster construction standpoint, certainly with that starting five right now in Boston. And if it doesn't work this year, or potentially in some kind of catastrophic way it doesn't work, maybe they don't even make the conference finals or something, real questions start to come in now about Tatum as a postseason performer and about him as a number one option. And then the other pillar of this in terms of what happens for them is just the fit of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum together. The concept of being able to replace a lot of what Jaylen Brown does, and his skill set being a little bit redundant alongside Jason Tatum, and being able to save some money and use that money on some of these other pieces, potentially get future assets and extend this era of Celtics basketball. I don't think that's a concept that can be completely dismissed out of hand. Obviously, this is a formula that is working for Boston. They've had postseason success. They've had incredible regular season success this year, but it does always, to me, feel like a team that is willing to make dramatic changes. We saw that this past offseason where they moved Marcus Smart. I would not be surprised if this is a front office that has the forward-thinking ability to say, hey, maybe this doesn't work. Maybe this contract that we gave Jaylen Brown made sense in the moment just to retain him on the team, but in the long term, paying him that much money in addition to potentially retaining Porzingis or Holiday or White or obviously Tatum long term with another extension way down the road as well, collectively spending all that money on those five guys, no matter how successful they've been this season, just isn't tenable under these new rules in the NBA. And it is a fascinating situation because we've seen this happen before where it feels like a young-ish team kind of has like a 2 to 3 year championship window, when realistically that might be just 1 year, sometimes maybe stretch it to 2 years. And this is probably their best shot, I would say, if you're a Celtics fan. This is probably as good as it's going to get for you over the next couple of seasons, because there's no guarantee that Drew Holiday is going to be on the team next year. Beyond that, there's no guarantee they're going to be willing to pay Derek White as well. They certainly could if they wanted to, but if things fall apart this offseason, it's going to mean, in my opinion, at least more significant changes than you probably could have ever expected for a Celtics team that obviously right now is a dominant regular season team.